All right, we are back again. I'm Jen Brizelli.
And I'm Kyle Godby. And we have another guest today. Wendy Moomaw has been generous enough to join us today. And Wendy, I'll hand it to you to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jen and Kyle. It's really good to be with you here. I am Wendy Moomaw. I'm a healing centered coach, facilitator, and strategist. And really, I catalyze care, connection, and possibility into reimagining futures here at the brink of shift and change. How do we need to be in ourselves, and how might we assist organizations to create more conditions for change and possibility? So I'm super happy to be with you both. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I wanted to write all of that down as you were saying it, because now I want to pull all of that apart and ask so many questions. But before going down that road, I just love to ask, what's alive for you at the moment? Where can we run with, or where can we run to from here?
What a great question. Well, I just got back from several weeks in Kenya and Tanzania. And one of the pieces with traveling overseas is also considering what are the conditions by which I can go, what are the conditions by which I can return, and had an opportunity to, to be in a warm data lab in Nairobi. And what does it mean to come into a country and think about a country with a Kenya? How do I bring in the potential of warm data with my co-host who's also American, and not bring these imperialist kind of knowings, or this is how we do it, and instead invite something much broader and more expansive to a different country and culture? So that's kind of what's alive for me.
Wendy, for anybody who's watching this who doesn't know what warm data is, and I'm not going to ask you to explain it in the way that our viewers can very much go Google warm data, and it's not probably novel to most, but I would love it if you'd spend just a moment talking about what that even means. What is warm data to you and in your practice, so that anybody else who's watching can kind of orient to it?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Well, one of the things that I think about that I do as a leadership and executive coach is how do we catalyze care? And part of the potential is when we're speaking to each other, there's three of us here on this call. If there were just two of us, it would just be person A and person B. And you would share a little bit about your life, and I might share a little bit about mine. And then there's this area C in the middle between us that we co-create together because we're in conversation. And now there's three of us. So now each of us has our own way of knowing about ourselves and the stories that are alive for us. And we kind of throw it into the mix, into the middle, just by the opening question. What is alive for me? Well, what's alive for me, no doubt, is different than what's alive for each of you. And so warm data is kind of this ecology of communications. What are we combining together? A creation of Nora Bateson, and thinking about how do we co-create? What possibilities are here now? What's alive now that we have three perspectives into the same mix? And so warm data is really the relational work in between. So I'm looking at a screen right now. I see three rectangles with three faces in them. And I think to myself, where's the warm data here? I can look up an information about Kyle online, LinkedIn. Jen, I could probably do the same for you, look it up, and I could understand a little bit about each of us. But really, nobody knows what's happening when all three of us come together. And so I think of warm data as this kind of ecology of communications that happens amongst us, alive within us, and will just dissolve when we're done.
I love that. I'm going to ask the devil's advocate question.
Bring it.
Because I've enjoyed your PNPs that you host monthly, and PNP being the online version of the Warm Data Lab. I've been sort of adjacent or with this community now for almost 2 years. Been a big fan. As I talk about this, the question that constantly comes up is this sort of for the sake of what? I'm going in, I'm spending my time. What's the transaction here? If I'm going to spend time and attention, what do you give me? And I have danced with that a little bit, but I'd love to hear your response to that.
Well, I'm going to jump back to jump forward, or maybe jump out to step in. One of the questions of this time that I'm kind of sitting with is, what are the questions we're asking? And are our questions evolving with the changing conditions of the world? And so sometimes we might ask questions that say, well, how do I know what the result is? Or how are you going to measure this? Or what do I get out of it? Which I think is actually a question of previous times, meaning as we change the conditions in the world, and we can say, if my goal is not to create the same conditions that the world is currently in now, I can't be asking the same questions. And so when people say, well, what am I going to get out of this? I'm really in the question of, what if you don't know? What if we don't know what we're going to get out of it? What possibility opens up then if we don't know? But this kind of, now I'm moving into certainty and uncertainty. I'm moving into complexity. I'm going to have an experiment instead of sitting with complicated. I'm for sure going to get something out of this. And so what happens if I don't know? And we do this all the time. You know, anybody who has been part of a family in any form, or maybe is raising their own children, will be like, I don't know. I like to think I know, and I'm trying to create the conditions to create outcomes that might matter. And the world is very different than now than when I raised my kids. So what am I offering? So I'm not sure if that answers your questions, but I just say, when people are asking that question, I'm kind of wanting to offer another question. And this is the complexity of the work, right? If I tell you the answer that you're looking for, you're not going to get what you want. And if I tell you an answer that you're not looking for, is it close enough to you that you might be able to go like, okay, I can consider that as a potential option?
Sounds to me, Kyle, like you just asked the wrong question. No, I'm just kidding. We joke about this a lot.
I'm being asked the wrong question. Well, I don't want to
There's no
wrong.
such thing as a dumb question or a bad question. We've talked about this on previous episodes too, but
Sure.
I'm just chuckling because we're right. We're on the same wavelength, of course. But I think it's in the spirit of devil's advocate, which I think is a stupid idea as a concept anyway. But in the spirit of that, of asking questions that aren't even the right questions, especially Wendy, because you have so much experience with warm data and when warm data labs and people need people sessions. One of the things I've been really curious about from like a practice perspective, or from, dare I say, goals perspective, is I sense a lot of folks who find their way to warm data, who either find their way to the sessions, the labs, the interactions, or who find their way to the theory. You know, they read Nora's work, whatever it is. People kind of self-select into it, or they're sucked into the attractor well via whatever means and for whatever reason. But there are a lot of folks for whom, you know, coming into some level of practice or community around warm data has great potential for all kinds of wonderful things, but for whom they'll like never essentially get sucked into it under their own choosing or discovery, so to speak. And one of the things I've sensed is in the warm data communities that I've either been in or bumped up against, kind of this, like, I don't know if I would call it there's a nice creative tension in it. Sometimes it's a little bit more like despair. Sometimes it's sort of a positive spin on that is to say, the people who really need warm data or who really need to engage in, I like your choice of words around the ecology of communications. I like that a lot. Like the communications piece of that, I think, is meaningful. There's like this thing I sense that a lot of folks really are struggling with. The people who really need this, like, can't see it or won't engage with it because they can't answer Kyle's question, or they don't see the purpose, or they want to turn it into like any number of other dialogic methods where we just get together in a room and talk through things, you know, that's oversimplifying. So I would just be really curious to hear from you on this broad topic, which isn't even a question, but how you see or wrangle or engage with that, if you see that, if not, just this notion that people who encounter warm data, I think, can understand why it's, an incredible concept for people to engage with. But short of literally forcing someone physically to come into a warm data lab, there's this always kind of end of where, well, I think the people who really I want to invite into this, they won't ever engage with this because it just feels too open and strange and woo woo.
Yeah.
So I just want to hear from you on this topic.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I think there's many right answers. And I think anybody who's been involved in any kind of teams work or even their own work with their families and trying to improve communications among family members, you can't make anybody do anything.
Of course.
You short of just sharing what's happening and inviting somebody in alongside you for the experience, I think is the invitation. And I often say, like, warm data, the particular, if you knew nothing about it and all you had to do was show up and share a story if you wanted to. In fact, you don't have to share a story at all.
Right.
And just participate. What's there to lose? It's 2 hours of your life. Go in, try a thing. Not everybody loves it. Some people have some really difficult experiences. Some people will never come back. But we often try things, right? This is complexity. Like, hidden underneath all of this is there's the theory of complexity, which is I gotta have an experiment, and then I gotta get the data back to figure out if it works.
Yeah.
And it can be a very individual experience, right? Meaning you can offer warm data a community of 20 people, and each person gets to decide, do I want to opt in? Do I want to have this experience? Do I want to explore this for 2 hours? And many people might turn around and say no. So, that's a piece of it. The other thing is, because you don't need to prepare, you don't need to know anything. You only need to know about yourself. Often
that's asking a lot.
Well, and you get to share what you want to share, right? We all have very intimate stories about ourselves, but you don't have to share any of that. It can just be a very simple story for yourself. There's really nothing to do but show up. Show up, have the experience, see how it goes, decide again if you want to come back. And there's something about coming back. So It's never about the first warm data experience. Is the first one intriguing enough that I'll go to the second?
Yeah, I appreciate especially the emphasis on warm data and a warm data lab or the particular container in which the interactions happen as an experiment rather than like a solution, which I don't think anybody involved in warm data would really ever say explicitly, like, this is a solution to our poly problems. But I do think we all get into this mindset because we have all been, we all live in the world. She gestures vaguely at everything. It's kind of easy to get stuck in a way of expecting something like warm data or any other method or tool or approach or practice as a solution to a problem. But I'm just pausing here to highlight that I very much appreciate that you are referring to it as an experiment. And really, it's many experiments. It's like, multiple plural experiments all happening together. So that is a very cool, I'm not even a reframe. I really like that framing. So I'm pausing to highlight it here for all of you viewers to really take it in. Anyway, carry on. Go ahead, Kyle.
Take advantage of the invite that comes along. Yeah, exactly. This makes me your comment before about not bringing in an imperialistic sort of history into the warm data labs in Kenya and Tanzania. I've noticed, as a facilitator adjacent to this, I'm not a warmie yet. It's on the list, but I've been fortunate enough to support a few of these.
You played a few on TV.
Yeah, I play a warmie on television. That's right. I'm in disguise, but it's shocked me how many people I've been in those planning sessions with. and it's not the majority, but just shock alone, that there's a sort of, this is what's happening in the world, or this is a message that I want to get across. How do we craft this in a way to deliver? And a few of us have to pump the brakes pretty hard and say, it's not what this is about. It's not about us. We're making space. We're not delivering anything other than that space. I wonder what may have changed for you, or what came alive bringing this into Kenya and Tanzania with that awareness of the imperialistic position that might change, or has sort of reframed this whole experience for you.
Yeah. Well, I want to, the lab we offered was in Kenya, which is not the same as Tanzania, or Tanzania as some people call it. And so just want to recognize that it was offered in Nairobi, Kenya. There's a couple of things that got highlighted for me, having offered warm data labs, both in the U.S. and also in a variety of different subcultures. Right, America has many things, and also offered People Need People sessions, which is the online version of warm data, and that touches into lots of different cultures around the world because it depends on who's here. Offering, being present with both the potentiality of what warm data is, and also allowing the culture to invite warm data into its culture. And it kind of has me wondering about organizations, how we invite things in, right? The organizational principles that we kind of speak about, this is how it runs and this is what we're expecting, is kind of a little bit, this is really an opening to possibility. And if I do everything the way that I've always done it, I'm going to get the same outcome that I've always gotten, and be in the question of why isn't anything changing? And so warm data really is kind of a really light touch into something different. And when we brought it into Kenya, I thought a lot about, I'm not going to be here for other warm data labs. So how am I creating the conditions for the second warm data lab? And how am I creating the conditions for people to be both in community as a group, because warm data is often held by a group of hosts, not just one host, or a community of people, not just one person, and several being certified in warm data itself. And also, when we're, what's the difference that makes a difference, which is Gregory Bateson's question, right? And when we're infusing it into the potentiality exists in the space in between, if that's what we hold as warm data, then it becomes, what's the space in between that these Kenyan communities need and want for themselves? And we don't have any solutions. And so there's something about the model of imperialism. I come in, I tell you how it is that you should be run, how you should work, how you should live, how you should do, and actually kind of turning it upside down, which is, you have everything, you know what you need. How can warm data be in support of that? So it changes the question.
Oh, I
If
love
that
that.
isn't just like the spirit of everything that we talk about around here, Kyle, like to say to anybody, you actually already know what you need, and you have what you need, either at your own disposal or in the interconnectedness, the need is distributed, and the things you need are distributed and such. But I just, that strikes me, that warm data in some ways is such a really, I keep wanting to say effective, but that's not the adjective I want. But it's a really nice illustration of one means by which you can actively invite someone to consider, you have what you need. And my role here is to support it, or facilitate in some means, in a supportive way. I don't know. That's all. Just, it's nice to think about it in that frame, because again, I mean, I probably come at warm data too from a little bit of an angle where some of my earliest exposure to warm data labs was through folks who I won't name, but who didn't really make it appealing to me, because I think they were really reducing it in ways somewhat similar to what I was alluding to earlier. And so it was through continued curiosity that I was ultimately able to get a little bit more immersed in it, and in the true spirit of, Nora's ideas and a lot of the folks that are really invested in everything you've just said. But to that end, it's nice to think about it and to highlight that I think a lot of people who arrive at any kind of systems oriented practice, which is like my catch-all term lately, I think are all kind of arriving at that orientation, which is to quit trying to solve and quit trying to do anything on behalf of anybody else, and instead just ask, how can I be in service to you? Because believe it or not, you gotta know. You already know what you need. And so I just appreciate if everybody would just take everything they're doing and start talking about it that way. I'd be happy. But
It's such a good reframe, because I think I'm hesitant to say everyone has what they need in a lot of cases,
fair
because we're limited by our connections, and but if you were to zoom this out another layer and say, by the ability to create those connections, that is the you have everything you need component there. And so I'm suddenly a little bit more comfortable talking about it with that particular caveat.
Yeah.
I was just about to go somewhere. The where was I going to take this? While I paused on this, what's coming up?
Well, I just want to, I'm really appreciating this. It's true that everybody doesn't have what they need. It's,
right.
One of the things that I think being in conversations around different contexts, which essentially is what warm data is, reveals the structures and the processes that in fact reduce the potential for people to have what they need. So I think that's really important. And it's especially important when we think about, when we think about identities and we think about individuals and people defining it across the world very differently. What is identity? So I think that's this piece of you have what you need is you have your personal stories. They're your lived experience and they're true for you. So in that way, you have everything you need. And then I put us together in a group, and we get in a group, we're impacted by structures, social constructs, patriarchal structures, power dynamics. And there's any number of ways that actually you don't have what you need. But from the beginning of time, we've been in stories trying to live and survive together. And so the question becomes, what gets unlocked when we're together in that way? And that's why I think like warm data has kind of like this stories around a fire and generational stories. So sometimes there's somebody, and I've been in a room where there was like an 86-year-old and a 9-year-old in the same room participating in warm data and then sharing their stories about what they learned about each other. And I don't know what your household is like, but here when we decide to get together close to the end of the year, when we might celebrate over a feast of food, people say some people are in this room to watch TV. Some people are in this room to prepare the food. Some people sit at this table because these are the people who are engaged in conversation here. And, there's a kid's table and an adult's table and we just stratify and separate and silo out the conversations. So we don't actually have this intergenerational mix. So it's interesting to think about warm data as a potential also of bringing everybody's voice into a room and giving it an opportunity to be spoken through its own stories.
I'm so glad you're talking.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jen.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know, what the quote is, or I think it's usually attributed to Carl Jung, but Lord knows. But it's the notion about questions, and that like the most meaningful questions don't actually get answers or solved, right? That you sort of outgrow them or transcend them, kind of in line with what you were saying earlier, Wendy, about questions and asking different questions of the future versus the present and such. And so I think there's so much about just listening, especially as you guys were just chatting, that to me hits on that. And it's those questions and those quotes. There's some quote somewhere I can grab and actually read it. It says the thing about the question is you're not actually going to solve it. You're just going to outgrow it. Blah blah blah. They get trotted out. They sound kind of nice. They're a little philosophical, but then like down to the dirty work of actually being in practice with other humans and bagging my groceries and like going to the ATM, that kind of stuff. All of a sudden, all that stuff's like, well, these things just don't compute. You've got your beautiful quotes and ideas here and then your day to day. But I do think for anybody here who's not familiar with warm data, it is one of the practices that to me doesn't just bridge, but just like you've just said, Wendy, I mean, because of the trans-contextual kind of focus, it also to me isn't just context that different people experience because of their life and their stories. It's also context from thinking about things at some level of abstraction or philosophical implication at the same time as thinking about putting on my boots this morning and they were still wet inside because, I got snow in them last night and didn't layer them out. Like those live on top of each other too. And that to me is one of the things about warm data that's so powerful. So for anybody who's not familiar with it, that's a reason to check it out.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm so glad you're referring to it as just stories or sharing, not storytelling explicitly. And I think I heard that originally, or maybe I was told that originally. It's all about storytelling. But my participation has been so much about listening. I think the expectation, just what I got originally was I expect everyone's going to be telling stories. Everyone's going to wait for their opportunity to take the pulpit and go. And
like
my experience has actually been like,
the story, like the Moth, the event called the Moth, where people get up and tell stories. No, okay, but I know, like, see, but is that what you were thinking? Like, it was
that was sort of it. I mean, I guess I expected an exchange to be happening, but I'm surprised by how many people yield the space to listen within those sessions. Always, it is. I think there are a few things that stand out that are beyond so many of the structures of knowledge sharing and relationships that I think we're used to here in North America. That's one of them, is that there is I might wait to listen before I have something to contribute. Not I doubt what I have to say, because I have my own stories and my own experiences, and that's the why we're here gathered in the first place. But there is still, I go into those rooms and I am just looking at people waiting to hear what else is going. I have so much less interest in saying, well, here's what happened to me. Here's what's coming up. Like and I find so many other people in the room are doing the same thing, almost to the extent, at least the first time we go into a room, there's a couple of minutes of just dead silence and everyone staring at each other. And that's so revealing about the difference between so many other contexts where, all right, we've got 15 minutes, let's go. Or somebody needs to break some silence or some ice or something. And instead, it is so often that it's just quiet in those first couple minutes. And everyone takes a big, deep breath. And we just kind of stare at each other, which is amazing. That sets a whole different tone. By the third session, there is this eagerness to like, here's what's going on, I think. But I think where I got hooked after the first one that I went to, it was that I kind of walked out and there were things that, when you see one of those movies or a documentary that just you can't get out of your head for like a week or two because you just got slapped in the face by something, knocked off balance a little bit. That's a regular occurrence for me coming out of warm data, in that I'm finding that it's what we talk about a lot with sense making. We're kind of gathered around a similar thing, but we each have a slightly different vantage point. It's not even all that slight when we get to really talking about it, but it starts with the center of that Venn diagram where the crossover is already established, and there's no credibility. I love calling this out too. This is very different. Also, nobody has to say, here's why my experience is valid. I have 15 years of experience doing blah 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 blah, and or from this point of view, or because of how I grew up, this is how I'm able. Instead, it's just a story of me growing up, or the story of some of that 15 years of experience, just an anecdote within it. So now I'm on a little bit of a rant here. What I was saying, I appreciated there not being any rants, but what is I've never really sat down and examined that. What when you watch that sort of thing happen, Wendy, what I don't know, what gets vindicated, or what questions come up, or what are you seeing interlaced there?
Well, I think, I'm both an observer of it because I might be offering a warm data lab, but warm data itself is we participatory. So we set up the warm as warm data hosts, and we go into the room and we actually get into the groups and have conversations as our own person, not because watch me have this. I'm not teaching people how to do it. I'm just dropping into myself and doing it. And I think, so I can really only speak from my own like first person experience, which is um, for me, the practice is in navigating what is happening for me as I hear other people's stories. So someone said to me one time, "You're going to meet your family no matter where you work," which to me I interpret it as if there's issues you have with specific members of your family, you're maybe not in conversation or they're hot buttons, you can pretend that that doesn't matter because it's not at work. And then you go to work and you meet somebody who triggers you in exactly the same way. I don't want to use the word trigger, who stimulates you in the same way. And it has nothing to do with your family member. It has everything to do with the situation, but you remember. And that's actually kind of like a beautiful teacher, which is this thing that is stimulated in me is still something I need to work or I need to heal or I need to be with. And these warm data conversations for me are often an exploration of listening to other people's stories, picking out a very small nugget of something in there that goes, oh, it reminds me of this in my life, and then exploring that for myself. And it's all happening like live, which is wild. So as we're kind of in conversation, someone will say something about their story and I'll drop me back to, oh yeah, I remember when I was 13 and I was at the, and I met up with these friends, and all of a sudden I'm back visiting an older version of a story, but I'm bringing on often a new frame. Not always. Sometimes I get stuck in the same thing, but sometimes their stories are enlivening mine. And I think that that's the thing. So I think of it a little, it's an individual practice, but you're doing it in collective.
Mm-hmm. When I was bringing participatory design and narrative participatory research or inquiry into a large organization not long ago, at the same time, trauma-informed design was making an entrance. And I found early on that there was a little bit of a clash between the two of us. I was introducing, let's all get together and share some stories. And the trauma-informed design folks were saying that has negative implications. There's a risk there. Don't think that we all just get to sing kumbaya and playing your drum circle and that's going to be nice all the time. And I've been trying to hold both of those things for a long time. I've certainly noticed that the risk is valid. I've seen a few times where people come together, particularly in PNPs, and there are just two stories that have difficulty coexisting in a small space. And I think of a story that my wife was telling me not long ago where she was in her spin class. Her mother had just passed from cancer, and the person leading that class had just beat cancer. and was sort of announcing, I disavow the idea of cancer as a whole. It is not a thing. It's not. And she was kind of just expressing her power over it. It's earned, but at the same time, my wife's going through her own loss and grief associated with this. So, I've seen things like that come up in some PNPs and warm data before. Where is there a way to balance that? How is your thinking of holding those two things?
Well, I'm curious. I'm curious for you when you have been an observation of that. What
Mhm.
what happens for you?
It stays with me. Usually, I get to see two things that I can say. Obviously, I don't question the validity of either of these things, but there they are. I remember seeing somebody come in, and it was one of those third rooms where they came in and they were really boisterous and let me share what I've been thinking and blah, blah, blah. And the other person sitting back and saying, I'm not surprised that the white man came in and stole the show. Was the first one to we've got 15 minutes here. They talk for 10 minutes straight. And I'm only saying this because I'm finding a comfort in saying this because of the place we're in.
Cool.
And the response from this guy was, I'm usually the shyest person in the room. It's very difficult for me to speak. And I'm finding a comfort in being the first person to speak right now. And I just had to kind of watch that and say, oh, this is what it is. This is what it's all about. This is amazing.
Yeah. It reminds me of when you might go into an organization and you're going into a team setting and everybody walks out with a different memory of the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is that? We were all in the same place and everybody took a piece of the pie. Some overlap and some don't with what actually happened in the meeting. And everybody is right. So this is kind of, it's kind of a practice of multiple truths. But we don't call it that. We don't say, oh, look, we're sitting in this thing of multiple truths, because when you're in warm data and you're in the experience, you're actually just talking about your own story. But if I jump out and I do that balcony dance floor thing and I look at it, I might actually say, wow, what's actually happening is I'm listening to multiple truths and I'm not contradicting what the story of someone else, because it's their lived experience. And so in this way, it becomes a real practice because everybody you're in a room with changes every time. And I don't know how you all live your lives, but I notice that I can change from day to day. The things that might be really present for me one day, I have completely forgotten by the next day because something else has overtaken the things that I feel are important at the moment. So in this way, coming back to the practice is the learning. And I realize, oh, I am changing every day. And if I know that about myself, that potential exists for other people. And this is where the ecology of communications becomes really important, because it's a living system.
Yeah.
Like we are.
Yeah, there was something when you were saying earlier kind of, triggered a little thought cloud above my head around noticing, right? And now you've come back around to it. But so much of this type of practice, I won't even say explicitly just a warm data lab, but so much of it ends up becoming like building the muscle reps or the muscle memory in the gym, right? A habit of mind, but not a habit in a way that it becomes habituated and automatic, right? But ultimately, you reduce the energy gradient, and that habit of noticing and sort of perspective taking and being able to do that without it having to be this conscious, I've sat down, I'm trying to take in multiple truths, I'm trying to weigh the story and the motivations of this guy here and this guy here and this person, even in the spin class example, there's multiple, not even those two, right? Like there's multiples of lenses and such. And I kind of I understand, and I kind of offer a lot of grace and patience to people who want to grasp right away for like a what should be done. Like, should that cycle, should the spin teacher, leader, whatever they're called, should she have censored herself or himself? Should people ask for permission? Like, what should be done? Or in the case of your wife, how do we increase the individual's ability to heal or move through or have the tools to do this or resilience? And it's like, forget about like what should be done. Like, that's what I find is just so kind of resonant here in the example, is that being able to even build the muscle memory for that kind of perspective taking inside the container of a warm data lab. It's that habit of mind that you carry outside into your interactions, at the bank or wherever. And that's, to me, one of the best, like, most powerful parts of it. Obviously, being in the community with people in those times and sharing our stories is lovely too, but I like to see the kind of ripple effects. And I know that's all part of it.
I hear you saying that you're building a muscle for grace. Is that
maybe? Well, I mean, actually, to honor what Wendy said too, even grace is an interesting word, but I would even go further to say building the muscle for grace, but implied therein is the acknowledgement that other people, are, the trend right now where people call other people non-player characters, like, oh, you're just an NPC, you're just a computer character in my life story, like that whole thing.
right?
It's the reverse of that. So it's building the muscle for grace, but also like maybe extending grace isn't just I'm extending you patience or I'm trying to have empathy or enact some compassion. Like, it's a little bit more about understanding that every single living and probably non-living thing has the capacity to change, and the changing is the learning, is the growing, is the whatever. So I would call it like there's something beyond grace, and I don't know, maybe there's
the other thing I hear come up a lot is a whole person.
What is that? What the hell does that mean?
I know, but this is what that breaks down too, because when you said it from the beginning, it's the ecology of the conversation between that. It's the space in between.
So the person is an ecology. Like, you know what I mean? There's
of
like,
course.
Yeah, but yes, I like when you go to summarize and you're like, so what you're saying is, and I'm like, yes, and
yes,
these other things.
That's the point of that.
They're all in contradiction. So
let me fire to the third ring of the concentric circle here and see if
three-body problem right here is what this
bingo.
is.
Yeah, exactly. I think a phrase I might use, and we use often in warm data, is mutual learning.
Yeah, Samantha C, man. I mean, I had to stop myself, but like, I'm big on learning, and I think that the limitations of the word learning in modern colloquial use of that word are like probably my personal cross at this point. But it is, at the end of the day, I would say it's learning. It's understanding that people and that all of us have the capacity, and not even the capacity, the instinct. It's like lifing. It's what people do. It's what living things do. We all learn and grow in mutually, reinforcing ways. But how do you remind people that not only are they naturally able to do it, other humans are able to do it too? I don't know. Is it offering grace? Yeah.
Well, and maybe it's mutually unlearning, right?
Exactly.
It's like, I just want to. There's a lot of promise in doing and showing up together and being in conversation. That's essentially what's happening. And in a deeply polarized world, one of the challenges of polarization is that if I try and convince somebody of something, I bring a host set of statistics about it. Yeah. When you're in polarization, what people will do is pull apart the statistics, take the data that supports their position and confirms we are still polarized. Yeah. And the way we can reshape that is by using personal stories to warm up the space for people to understand, there are so many things we have in common. And the beauty of this work, having previously done, work in racial equity work, the beauty of this work is the more differences in the room, the better.
Yeah.
And so 100%. That practice of being with difference is about expanding perspectives. And then once I'm in the practice of it, then, as you said, Jen, I go out into the world and I see a thing and I recognize something is different. Like, Kyle, when I hear you describe that story, I can easily say, one reflection could be, wow, that teacher did a wrong thing. They shouldn't have done that thing. Somebody should go up and walk up to them, tell them there are people in the room who are not having the experience. That's one way to do it. And then there's any number of other ways that we might approach the fact that, oh, right, of course, this person has had an incredible opportunity to continue living their life. And how wonderful for that person, which is maybe a form of grace, right? You're having your experience and I'm offering that. But what it also is like, we can both be right.
Yeah.
We can both have different perspectives about the same word. And this is the potential, the limitation of language, one word, and the potentiality of how we can be with that is the warming of the stories.
There's something here because, as you're talking to, I'm also reminded about like one of the main reasons I ultimately did revisit warm data and decide, what, I am going to do the training and I am going to get certified, because even if I don't necessarily know where in my life the opportunity to host will happen, I just wanted to come back into that world, right? And one of the main reasons was partly for very much what you're just describing is in my own experience, in my own work, one of the things I have found to be true through practice, not through reading about it, is exactly that dynamic where I can be in conversation with someone, or I can be in conversation with many people who we all are very different. We might be polarized in whatever sense we mean that. We might be very different in terms of our ideological or like value kind of worldview systems. We might be very different in terms of the goals we have or what we think is wrong or right and what we should, like, whatever it could be. And the only thing that's ever been effective at achieving some kind of shared, desirable future thing, state, whatever, has been exactly what you've just said. And so starting to hear folks involved with warm data talk about that, and I was like, okay, that's something I recognize that has some truth to it from my experience. And now I want to hear the real deal here and not just these other people's kind of over-reduced versions of warm data. But to that end, I think it's so intriguing because the notion of whether it's grace or whatever word we want, it's not even just that there are the multiple truths. It's that to extend another human, and I guess I should be true to myself here and say it's more than human, but to extend another entity or being the acknowledgement that they have the capacity for change. Like that is at its core, that is the thing. So even if we never achieve it, even if you or I or anybody else don't actually end up changing or learning or growing or unlearning, even if the net vector that we end up traveling is not desirable and ultimately doesn't work out in positive ways, like at the end of the day, like to me, that is what this is all about, is I'm still going to extend to you or offer or invite, whichever direction you want to apply to it, that you have the capacity. And it's not on me or for me to be the arbiter of whether that capacity gets fulfilled or not. So, which obviously loops back around a little bit to what we talked about at the beginning too. But so much of being in conversation, being in non-goal oriented and non-target driven activity together, there's a lot of ways to do that, but it's the name of the game, man. Kat, I don't know if there's more you want to ask, but I want to go a little off in a different direction, but I want to give you guys, I'll come back to it, but like if there's more you guys want to say on this thread, please do. I'm just giving you the advance warning that the next thing.
I've got one, but Wendy, you look like you were about to say something.
Well, I just want to name that, kind of riffing off what Jen was sharing. The practice is in saying what's true for us. And how often do we hold back? Do we not share what's really on our minds or on our hearts or alive in us?
Yeah.
And when you get into a room or you meet up with people that you've never met before, you can actually try on new parts.
Yeah.
I can try on my stories in a new way. And that's a practice.
Yes.
Because how can we grow? Like, people, if they want to create change in their own lives, we have to practice being in this in different ways. And sometimes it's really hard to practice with people you love because they're like, what are you doing? That's
Yep.
not normal. That is
Yeah.
out of character. That is meh, 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 meh. So that's just another way of just seeing both. It can just be an individual practice in some ways, showing up and doing the thing. So I just,
Yeah.
thanks for inspiring that reflection, Jen.
Yeah. I think it's so spot on. One of the early
Yeah,
books that I read that was related to the topic we were just talking about. I forget what the actual title is. It's like How Minds Change or something like that. I mean, I was attracted to it because I was like, there's no way this guy has a magic formula for this. But I hate read it. I chose to read it out of hate. But it's a good book. It doesn't matter at this point. But the point you just made, Wendy, that you made far more eloquently than he does, but that kind of inspired in me a little bit of the framing I often use with Kyle. We talk about how I like to create safe spaces for dangerous thinking or for things that feel dangerous to people. And in many ways, a warm data lab is just that, as are many other things. But dangerous doesn't literally mean like just exploring things that feel threatening. It's also, I'm going to put on this different mask or this different hat, or I'm going to play act what it means to be a person who feels differently. And wait a minute, it actually feels like me. Whoops. So there's such, I don't know, there's such good stuff there. And I'm always looking for breadcrumbs to leave behind for people to this end. And like that book was one for a while that I still do recommend to some people because I know it's exactly like the door, the entry that they need. They need to read a book that was, a New York Times bestseller that highlights studies and things. And then for other people, it is warm data. It's like, oh, you should go to a PMP, try this, do that, whatever. And so, it just kind of, this is making me realize right now that I'm trying to use a lot of these different breadcrumbs for the same end. And they're very different, but they are to the same end. So anyway, go ahead, Kyle. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was, and that was a very, it was sort of where I was going with a specific story, what you were talking about, Wendy, where I remember being in one of your PNPs with two people that were both widowed years ago, and they were talking about the relief that came with their partner's passing, which is a story that I've never heard anyone within my proximity. I might have seen a recording somewhere where someone has said that, but I've never been with two people discussing that before. And I was sort of thinking about the word grace and how wide and maybe misaligned it is in a lot of cases, but it's also a compartmentalization. And I think that's where this is sticking with me for a week or two after these conversations. I spent yesterday reading about insomnia and the fatal version of insomnia. And it got all neatly tucked into a part of my brain that said, okay, now I know more about that thing and I'm not thinking about it anymore. But the things that don't tuck neatly are the things that I'm meditating on for days, weeks afterwards. I don't know where to put this, but it's there. I need to build a new bookcase is it. And that's what's kind of amazing about the experience.
You have a bookcase? I don't even have that, man. Nothing tucked neatly for me.
No, it's like my desk. It's like an ADHD person's desk is what it is. It's Post-its everywhere and stuff hiding under Rubik's cubes and stuff like that.
You got to figure out what tags
Yeah.
and keywords to put on it and what yarn
Right.
to do it.
Yeah, and then you get to see stuff that was written in your handwriting and wonder, like, did I actually write this? It looks like I wrote it. Yeah.
We get a window into people's lives, and when I think about, some of the deepest work that the Conscious Collaboratory does is these people need people weaving communities. And the premise of that is because we're weaving in particular communities of practice, embodied social change from social presencing theater, liberated life, which comes out of Rev Angel Kyoto Williams's work around point practice and liberation framework. Dr. Resma Menakem's work around somatic liberation and thinking about embodied work. Dr. Bayo Komalofe's work around reimagining futures, post-activist work. and of course the warm data community. And we have another community, the Monterey Bay Meditation Studio. And so weaving into these particular communities who each have their own individual practices allows us to be with the stimulation of other people's stories, take care of ourselves at the same time that we're hearing those stories, and then revisit our own stories while staying in connection. It's the work, it's the potential, and it's also the invitation. Not every experience is great. Not everybody wants to come back. But there's room here to say, choose a level of engagement that works for you. Come one time, leave for 6 months, come back. There's a whole life that people have outside of this work and this offering. And part of the opportunity is to say, do I have enough in myself to try this work? And then I leave, and is there enough there that I might want to come back?
So you read my mind, because it was basically when I was like, I want to kind of ask something that might take us off in this direction. It was literally going to be that I know that you are obviously involved in a lot more things than just PNP sessions and warm data. And so I was going to invite you to talk a little bit about where it all fits in, or to not talk about any work you do and talk about anything else it relates to. But I was kind of curious to see that if we're on the warm data highway and I'm watching these exit ramps go by, I was going to invite you to take an exit ramp of your choosing.
Thanks. And another group that we bring in too is the work of the Acosta Institute, which is Dr. Angel Acosta works. And I'm a fellow in the Acosta Institute. And part of the change of this time, after being a leadership coach for a decade and more, and trying to think about how do we build, what does an equitable opportunities look like? What do processes look like? How do we build an inclusion? And then having to reshape again and going, what are we reimagining in futures? And deepening an embodied work, which is, I think, part of the challenge of our times. Everything is changing so fast now. Coming back from Kenya had me in the question of, am I at risk of not getting back into my own country? Like, what is happening here? I have a US passport, and maybe, and then they said, well, oh, sorry, we turned off global entry. Call it what you will about access and privilege and whatever, but I did have global entry, and they're like, oh yeah, it's off now. You have to do it the other way. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, what is happening? So a lot of the work I do in the world now is really, we can talk about collective sense making, but broader worldwide, what does it look like to live and thrive in areas where there's a lot of reductionist practices? How can I make it smaller? How can I constrict more? How can I create more rules? How can I separate people from systems? Like, we're watching structure get built. And how do people live inside this environment, which feels new to some people and has never not been true for others. And people will be like, I don't know how I'm going to survive. And some people will go like, I've been around here for hundreds of years and here I am. Right. And so these ways in which this is where the perspectives and the multiple truths really happen. So when I think about helping leaders and coaching and guiding leaders, I think about who's ready to make the jump to create something different. So, for example, I think a lot about movement workers, activists, and you think about the energy that it takes to actually do something and how often we might actually hurt each other, not quite unconsciously. How do we create the conditions so we can all be on the same page, so we can create the potential for us to work together, which is essentially what the conscious collaboratory is all about. And I think the last piece I'll share about that is like, the name collaboratory is really about a laboratory of experiments, and we're collaborating together. and we can't know. So it's really built for these times, which is the conditions are changing so fast. We're not going to be able to slow it down. So how do I slow down to create different conditions for what I'm trying to create? Replicating what's already here is actually pretty easy. People have lots of processes, books, theories, frameworks. This is how we got where we are right now. But that's actually not my question. My question is, if I'm looking at the law of diffusion and I'm looking at early adopters, where is the tipping point? What is it that needs to be created that enough people can look at it and go like, I'm willing to go there? If you're not an early adopter, and how do we create the conditions for this new thing that we don't have a name for, we don't have a vocabulary for, we can't really quite see it. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but I feel like I'm on some kind of off ramp now.
There was no question. Only
Riding
an
in the HOV lane with the rest of you. Thanks for being HOV 3+.
That is incredibly powerful. The how do we enter a space with people that have like, or how do we go into a space of discovery with people that have been there for a while, and what does that look like? As you were saying, that story that popped up for me was at the very beginning of the early on in the pandemic, right after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and then George Floyd. My son had just been born a few months beforehand, and there's this actually one of the few really great subreddits out there for new dads. It's incredibly wholesome and supportive, and it's just it was a lifeblood during that time. And I remember this panicked sort of like, what do we do now? How do we explain this to our kids? And that was the beginning of that was the initial question, and the response. And remember, this is Reddit. It's anonymized. All you see are names. You can't see faces. You can't see stories or where they're from. Just that one anecdote, that one response in the moment is all you get. But the amount of calm, collected, here's what my parents told me responses that came through, it's still overwhelming for me to think about and recant. Those contexts just needed to meet at the same place. There was nothing there that said that, well, I never considered this before. But the power of that was just the right intersection, the right time, the right number of things all converging at the moment. And you kind of feel that even in a very distant online sort of place where people were kind of struck and taken aback and saying, this is a moment of panic for so many people. It's a moment of status quo for so many others. And that divide became very, very potent in that moment. That's probably one of the bigger ones that comes to mind, but this is the sort of thing I talk about, I experience within warm data sessions, is that divide reveals itself with connections already strung across. That's so fascinating. That makes it suddenly able to be metabolized. So no question there. I'm just kind of riffing off what you're saying, but I think this was the attractor for me, the potential of this sort of work. It's amazing how you've gotten all of these communities of practice to intermingle in this space. One thing that I worry about as I work with folks that want to set up more labs or facilitate these participatory sense-making sessions, whether it's a true warm data session or not, is how we have the capacity to not create these heterogeneous or homogeneous spaces. How do we get that right, not necessarily the right blend, that's not the right way to say it, but how do we get these multiple perspectives to converge in the same place? How would you suggest for somebody that hasn't done this as long, it doesn't have the sort of rooted connections that you do? I want to go into an organization and try and bring a bunch of people together. would be top of mind to say, make sure this is aware, you've got an awareness for something like this?
Well, I often think if we're, there's such deep humility in the work of change and the change in ourselves. And so grab a list, grab a piece of paper, create a list of 10 people that you consider to be your close people. And then look at it across many lenses. What are their age? What are their genders? What's their gender expression? What are their cultures? Where did they grow up? All of these potential ways that we might call a social identity, but really are ways of just saying, how diverse is it, the group that I already interact with? Because if we don't know for ourselves, then we can't be helping other organizations do it, because we actually don't know the right questions to ask. We don't know we're not curious enough about ourselves, but we're asking an organization to do it. Now, this is so common, really, right? Like, do this for your clients, but not do it for myself. So for me, it's the reverse. Do for myself. Understand the complexity or lack of complexity often. And what do I want to get curious and learn more about? And then be in the conversation with my clients to help them see it, because it's the same practice. This lens work, one of the things about lens is that I see is that we have a natural tendency to make our lenses really narrow when we're stressed out. And we have a tendency to fall back into the narrowness of the way that we were shaped long ago. And so the practice is really consistently being in exploration with other people who can help us widen our lens. And if we don't do that, it gets narrower. If we're super stressed out, it gets narrower. And look at the world. The world. So everyone is navigating conditions that are changing the way we see ourselves and others. And our job as coaches, if we're interested in growth or transformations or systems work or social change, is to ensure that we're in the practice of what we want the world to be like. That's my idea.
That is such a that's such a great practice. I did that once with another team. I've never done that, just me on my own. I'm gonna try that when we're done here.
Yeah, we're gonna need to do this on our next you and me solo call. We're gonna
we can bring this into a COP, or I did this with a team of about 30 people, where I said list 5 to 7 people that you would go to for advice, that you would trust with something very intimate, or somebody that if you needed a job or you wanted to hire somebody, who would it be? What are those closest connections? And I don't mean like the meaningful people in your world, like your kids, right? Okay, assumed. Who are the people that you enact that meaning with through some sort of exchanges and connections? And then we went through now put their gender and how they identify with their or sexual orientation or ethnicity or whatever have you, and their age right across the board, and the amount of discomfort and the amount of groans that I heard in that room as we were going through that. This was the warm up to we're embracing DEI now, and everybody was sort of congratulating themselves for, okay, we're a DEI company now. All right, well, let's try this. That was a very humbling experience for all of us, but so I recommend this to everyone that has heard that is an amazing practice.
One of the things I'm just so intrigued to know that your instincts, Kyle, have never taken you to do that on an individual level. I say that as like a compliment that I'm surprised you never have. We should talk about that sometime. We should talk about that. Like I said, in our next one of these. I don't want to use Wendy's airtime on it, but
eating our own dog food again, right?
Well, what's interesting to me is the times that I have talked to people about exactly what Wendy's talking about. The one pattern that sort of always emerges, and this might just be a function of like me and the people I'm around, is that how much people sort of say, I realized this about the people I surround myself with. I've sought out with curiosity, how to gain other perspectives and, find community with other people so that I can not extract their perspectives, but, just have other people in my life that I can be learning from, and sharing experiences with. But how much of it ultimately comes back to like this assessment of someone's either past, like either chronological conditions or substrate, or literal current like surroundings and substrate. And it's just occurring to me now. I've never really thought about it in this way, but it's another way, especially because Kyle, you and I are always talking about how people bump up against complexity, but they don't have a name for it. This is another one where every time I've ever talked to or been in this kind of a sort of, say, exercise with people, there is that immediate, it's not a defensive mechanism to be like, well, it's not my fault I don't have any Black friends, it's because I grew up in a rich white neighborhood. Like, it's not that I'm talking about. It's more like, I just am realizing right now how much of my own actual existence around other humans and how much diversity, not just in social and economic, but even cognitive forms, I'm exposed to, how much of it is I have an agency in, and how much of it I don't, how much of it is influenced by, the neighborhood I live in or the place I grew up in or whatever. And it's just like this really interesting thing to be party to, or to be an observer to, or to, do on your own behalf, to realize like where you bump up between the individual and the collective, or the personal agency versus this is the conditions in which you're growing and the soil that you can't change, but et cetera, et cetera. So up until this conversation, I'd never really actually thought about that kind of reflection as another tool in the toolbox of ways people walk up to and recognize that kind of complexity, or that kind of individual versus, micro, meso, macro scale kind of thing we talk about a lot. So just a side little aha there.
I think it's for me, when I think about these kinds of activities, we're really inviting, I have no judgment. Like, you may make your list of 10 people, they may all be exactly the same and may be exactly what you want. Great. Live a full life. Like, you can live a full life in any form with whoever's on your list.
Yeah.
But for some, they may get more curious.
Yeah.
And it may not be something that they have easy access to.
Mm-hmm. And
in this day and age of the internet and Zoom, it really invites the question of what are ways, we're trying to reimagine something else. We're trying to reimagine a new future. If it's not the current conditions, how are we going to develop the skills to do it?
Yeah. Well, and you just said, and I would highlight that, and I think we all took it as sort of implied, but maybe to say out loud for viewers, the point here is that you would not want to trigger or stimulate in somebody this implied judgment, like, take a look at your list, notice how uniform it is. You know what I mean? Like, there's those exercises in corporate settings. That's always what happens. You do the pizza activity, you do the whatever, you know what I mean? And it's like, everybody take notice. And now shame on you. Your homework is to go away and come back with 3 new friends that aren't the same as you, right? I think half the challenge is either doing it in a way where you give yourself that permission to not judge yourself, even though we all claim we're not going to, we're still going to do it. Or if you're doing it with other folks together as a collective activity, how do you ensure that the space in which you're even doing that reflection avoids triggering that little bit of a shame or defensive response? Probably can't avoid it outright, but
yeah,
that me, it was implied. I mean, you said it, I think Kyle, you did too, but it's probably fair to not imply it and actually say out loud that in and of itself is it can be a challenge. It's part of, being really careful and thoughtful about how you engage in that stuff. Question, because we've also been talking a little bit about futures, imagined new futures, change, desirable, more of these, less of these. We talk, you said at some point, things we don't even have names. Well, look at me. I'm like, future thing, words. I don't know. We don't have words for it. It's not like I've designed in a box what my future is supposed to be, and now I'm working to get there, nor have I done this for all of humanity. But nonetheless, I think that in a conversation like today, is people can sort of sense that we still mean we want to see more desirable things and less undesirable things in our and our collective other humans' futures. How do you, Wendy, in the work you do across all of those communities, how do you avoid setting up that very black and white, current bad, future good? Or over index on, we got to get to the promised land, which is this radically amazing future that we're all trying to work towards, and that's why we're collaborating. How do we get to the promised land, and what do we forsake in that effort? Mm-hmm. And I am curious to hear how you think about that.
Well, it's interesting that you use the phrase promised land.
Fair point. It was ready at hand.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is the way language trips us up, right?
That's right.
The practices of how people and land have been colonized is in fact a thing of like, run out, take your flag in the ground, literally put it somewhere, and that's yours.
Yeah. Well, I do mean it that way. And I mean it that way, as that phrase, as the way that I do observe some folks to engage with futures.
Yeah.
But yeah, go ahead.
And holding this question of what if, and this is what Biokomalefe says, what if the way, I'm not going to get the phrasing exactly right, and I'm going to be sorry about that. I'm already sorry about that.
We'll come back and edit it, and we'll like do a little voiceover to get it
right,
perfect.
Exactly. What if we're actually, the very things we're doing are just a reflection of what we've already done, right? This is a paraphrase, but we are trying, if we don't want to create the same future that we're in right now. So, and I'm just going to, for a minute, make it personal. Like, I have 3 young adults, and we've raised them into a linear world that was the way I was raised into, and it worked out okay for me so far. Maybe many, many things not perfect. But I often say, I didn't raise them to be in this world. I didn't raise them to be in a world where there was going to be multiple wars going on. I didn't raise them to become part of a world where I was watching structures get built. And I didn't raise them into a world where the planet was going to be warming so fast they wonder if they're going to have a life 30 years from now. That's not the world I raised them for. So I offered, there's like deep humility in trying to understand where can I be an agent of change that is going to reflect on something positive. And part of this is unlearning the ways that I've been taught to build and be in a world. It's not here. And I don't know what it is. And so there's kind of this deep humility thing of, I don't actually know. But what might we create together that is a small enough shift that we could move there and try it? Instead of saying, I'm going to spend 10 years on a strategic plan and I know exactly where it's going to be, and therefore I'm going to build this thing for 10 years from now. Yeah. Nobody really knows what's going to be, what is shaping itself on the way to that 10 years. And so how do I create the conditions for smaller change in localities that might create something new? And who are the people who can dream that with me and be in that with me? And it's a lot like one of the things I just want to name is the reason why I bring so many different groups together is because there's a lot to be said for, I understand what needs to be done intellectually from my neck up. And there's a lot to be said about what it means to actually take that step into building the thing. And many people very, very good at this neck up thing. Frameworks, futures, whatever, paths, goals, strategies. But have you done it? Have you yourself done it in your own life? Reshaped, gone through, tried to do a thing? Because sometimes there can be a dissonance there between the mind and the body. And the future is asking us to be whole. I think Kyle spoke about wholeness, like to be whole, to step into that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and you kind of went right there too. I was going to ask in sort of conjunction with that, because that prefigurative practice is so critical to everything you're talking about. Do you find that it's a thing you cultivate with each other? Is it something that folks who are drawn to this work have to reconcile? And, basically, you've already answered it. You've answered it, but it's, to me, that's worth highlighting, that there's a component to acknowledging that there are things we want to be different, and the ways that we all have been taught to make things different aren't the ways that are going to do it this time or in this way. And that sort of prefigurative living some pieces of it forward, as we go together, just continues to strike me in a lot of conversations that Kyle and I have here as not a prerequisite, but it's like, again, I'm reaching for, I want to say it's a skill set, or it's a mindset, or this or that people need to have to feel like they have self-efficacy in this work. But it's not a skill set, it's not a mindset, it's none of those things, right? It's a collection of practices and behaviors and just beingness. But so yeah, I appreciate that. Also, I didn't my hope too in asking some of these questions is partly because I just am dying to hear another person articulate things that probably many people will find familiar or resonant, or at least rhymes with things that they already care about. But God, we need more. We just need more more voices in the chorus, right? Singing slightly different notes. So I am mindful of the time, and we probably should wrap soon, but I did want to both, obviously, Kyle, if there's anything you wanted to ask or say, of course, and then Wendy, we love to give you the last word on anything you'd like to have.
Yeah, I don't have a quick question, but it is a burning question that you just brought out. So maybe, well, we'll see how we run with this.
Yeah.
Jen and I had a great conversation a few weeks ago here about being a vegan, and that sort of exploded into us being in a world that we're so entangled with that the things we might find reprehensible, we have no way of knowing how complicit we are, or how we activate those things. And the more time you spend sort of investigating how easy it is to go off the cliff of despair. And I'm just wondering, and probably a perfect way to start to wind down, you spend a lot of time investigating that space, these tensions and connections. How do you stay motivated, and how do you find the potential and not go into that despair, or do you? How does that work?
It's a great question. When I was in Kenya, they told us that there's 55 million people in that country, and 87% are on WhatsApp. And I thought to myself, often we say, well, I'm going to get off WhatsApp because I might not agree with something that's happening. And it helped me expand the context. I think not only do we have humility here, but there's also no one right way. We are bridging change right now, which means I have to both accept that there are some things of the old system that I have to be a part of. And liberation itself, if you liberate from everything, you shouldn't probably liberate from your medical insurance. You probably shouldn't liberate from your car insurance if you have a car. You can't really get, there's some ways. And so how do we, and it's for each individual to determine. I'm not here to hold and say, this would be the old pattern. Here, I have a rubric for how you can enter this new world. And here are the 45 checkboxes you have to have. And if you have any less than 23, you're not ready to go. This is like an old pattern. And so there is a lot of nuance, but it is part of releasing the expectation that I know what's happening and I'm certain about what needs to get done is part of the practice. Don't get me wrong. I want to be certain. I want a list and I want to know exactly what order it has to happen in. I can feel that alive in me. And how do I make that and recognize it as, oh, right, those are the patterns I've been structured in. That's how I've been educated. That's how I get credentialed. This is how people might find my work important, is if I know all these things. But if I tell people I know those things, it's not true. So simply, it's your integrity framework. But each of us has our own. And what is it that allows, what can you be flexible on? And also, what can you be in the practice of allowing with another? Because if my integrity framework is so tight that I look at yours and I go, it doesn't map to mine, there's my pattern of mine is better than yours, quote, quote.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that helps, but all I can say is, we're lucky enough that we get to have a life and to be living at this time. And it's painful to both be witness to it, but there's also possibility. And that's what I'm here for. Possibility.
Love it. Thank you, Wendy. This has been fabulous.
Thank you for having
Did you have anything you wanted to touch on before we close up?
Me?
Yeah.
Wendy? Sure. I'd love people to visit my website, consciouscollaboratory.com.
Mm-hmm.
Come to our People Need People Weaving communities if you'd like. It's free and you can register on the website. And if you're interested in exploring, find me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Wendy Moomaw, and there's a lot of potential out there, but we have to find each other.
Yeah, love that. And you have a People Need People going on Monday, is that right?
Monday, March 9th.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hope to be there. So yes, please, everyone come join us.
Yeah.
Now we have to hurry up and get this on YouTube right now so people see it. I'm just kidding.
Yep, post immediately. Right. Otherwise, that's just going to be annoying. But it happens every month.
Yes. There are many. There will be many opportunities. Awesome. Okay. Well,
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Kyle. Thanks, Jen. Pleasure.